This podcast is a part of the Garnett Media Group podcast network. Garnett Media Group is the official partnership between student-run media outlets at the University of South Carolina. For more information on GMG podcasts or other student work, visit garnettmedia.org. Hi, my name is Dr. Jabari Evans, and welcome to Uncommon Naledge, the podcast where we talk about all things spanning race and representation within mass media. This podcast is a partnership between the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of South Carolina and Garnett Media Group. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode.
People ask me all the time, do you write books? Well, I hadn't written a book since 2012 or since 2013. But that didn't mean that I couldn't write books or that I was uninterested in writing books. It was really to trouble the idea of genre. But folks are like, well, I'm a person who writes books and AD's a person who writes rap albums. And I'm like, that's a weird way to think about that, because that's just not the only way things can be.
Yeah,
And so when we're convening and having these kinds of events, it means that we also have to we have to challenge our own imaginations to be more expansive about what a retrospective or like what future looking kinds of engagements look like and sound like. And who gets invited, because if we're just reproducing the thing at a place like Harvard, people are going to take that and run with it, and they're going to look at the luminaries on the stage and sometimes even ignore what those luminaries say, because they're reading the staging and not as much engaging with the content. They're looking at the body.
Oh yeah. But I'm 42 years old. I still remember being 18, 19, and these were the names. Not Regina, because she's fairly new, but these were the names. And so I can only imagine like a younger grad student. It's almost like how people watched Mike Tyson fight Jake Paul, and they wanted him to be the same guy that knocked out Michael Spinks. Like they wanted it to be that. And it's almost like it don't matter what certain people say. If you look up to them, or if you admire their position, or like you say, the body that they take up space with, it's hard to actually get to the heart of like the work, and that kind of it's funny because I do a lot of this research about clout, but it operates in academia too, where like even at the little dinner that was afterwards, where I'm like, I don't know, like my homegirl was like, you could come to the dinner, and it didn't feel like I'm supposed to be there, or like, where it's like Skip Gates is there, and I'm like, all right, well, am I still cool? And then one of the brothers that was, he's in the African American Studies department over there, that I met previously on MLK Day, and he was like, "No, you good, like." Don't even worry about it. He's like, you're good. But it wasn't until he said that I actually felt good, or felt like, it was almost like, am I supposed to be at the table, or am I supposed to be over here? Like, and there's those social dynamics are still there. Even when it broke away for lunch, it was like, okay, the panelists go to lunch over here. Y'all figure it out. It was that type of thing where
it's like, reproducing the high school lunchroom all over again. But there's a version of that in the music as well, where and also in organizing, like that. There's like an old guard, and then there are people who are coming up, and some of those people want the respect of the elders, but then others feel like the elders don't talk to us, so we don't talk to them. And really, like we collectively lose because of that. But like, it's not, I don't think that these are necessarily even personal gripes. They are structural issues that, we should resist reproducing. And with that, then, you know, like I said, I make the choices that I make about like showing up or not showing up or being in the place based on not having to tire myself out trying to figure out how to read the room. I know how
Mm,
to read a room that I'm invited into.
right.
I don't know how to read a room that I barged my way into, or there's a certain kind of performance that I'm going to
Hmm.
do because I barged my way into the
Oh
room.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Um,
It's like,
so
yeah, I'm gonna let you know. Like, first question I asked is Jabari Evans, assistant professor,
yep, yep,
University of South Carolina, and then immediately certain people were like, oh, I've read your work.
yep,
So then it becomes, because I'm like, oh well, you're not gonna address me like I'm just a lowly graduate student. Not that graduate students are lowly, but like
yeah,
there's still some weight on my name too. So
yeah,
I'm gonna let you know I'm in the room, that I'm
yep,
here. And like I said, for those that knew me, it was, it was cool. I mean, I feel like everybody on the panel knew me except for Trisha Rose.
yeah,
And so it wasn't an issue at all. It just was one of those things where, like I said, it still felt like I got an angle
yeah,
to let you
yeah,
know I'm here.
yep,
It wasn't as but I also felt like it was necessary. You
yeah,
know what I mean? In
yeah,
some ways, I felt like it was necessary. Like, because if you all having these insular conversations with each other, and that's
yeah,
the only way it happens.
yep,
Um, and then I come to find out, like, folks are like, oh well, if you got the space to travel, like, oh, you could come out to
yep,
UCLA and
yeah,
let's
yeah,
do
yeah,
something. Or if you got the space, I
yeah.
didn't know you had the space to travel, like that type of thing. And it's like,
Well,
well,
yeah, well, I think that, networking is important, and it does, make for, like it does make the conditions for collegiality a whole lot better. Definitely makes them different, but probably makes them better. And so yeah, yeah, would never deny the power of networking, like how crucial it is. Um, but there are costs associated with it. I was also going to say that the thing that we're talking about, I imagine, has a version in music as well, just like in production or in
oh
songwriting or
yeah,
whatever. And so, as people talk about rappers like evolving to become different kinds of content creators,
yep,
or like young artists saying, if you put on that kind of beat, I'm not going to rap.
yep,
And so you have these people who are like, because young in academia is not the same as like young in pop culture.
it's not.
And but like but we all are, like we're all working with like a consistent either like infantilization or a kind of ageism that privileges
Yeah,
eternal youth over everything else. And so that's another thing that it feels is probably going on. And we know that we would be, I mean, when students tell me that they haven't read or haven't listened to or haven't watched a certain thing, I was asking somebody about the film Deliverance, and they're like, oh, well, that came out in the 1970s before I was born. And
yeah,
I'm like, that's a weird way to tell me you didn't read it or that you didn't see
yeah,
it. I mean, because you're making
yeah.
it seem as if like it happening before you were born. Like your parents existed before you were born. You don't know them.
Right.
Like
That too.
you ain't gonna ask them no questions. There are a
Yeah.
lot of things that happened in the world before you came to exist.
Yeah.
You're claiming you want to be a scholar.
And you have more access to that
Yeah.
information.
So what is like, why are you telling me this inconsequential piece of information?
Mm,
But like in art, you can say, I mean, and I've had journalists say it where I'm talking about they're giving a bad take on political parties and rappers, and
mhm,
I'm telling them about some of the express politics of their favorite rappers that they like to think are like radical or have different kinds of politics than they've
mhm,
expressed. And then
mm.
the journalist is like, oh, well, I was in middle school during the Obama administration. And I'm like, that's a weird way to say that you're not going to do your job. Because like that has nothing to do with the conversation that we're having if you're a
Yeah.
journalist and you're
Yeah.
responsible for giving people accurate information. And when you talk to me as a source and then I give you access to information that might make your story better,
Right.
the response shouldn't be, I can't do that because that's out of bounds. And the
Yeah.
boundary is an artificial one that you created like from your birth date.
Yeah.
Yeah, that like you just told on yourself. And so I think that there's that as well as like this
Oh
thing
wow.
that's like happening with history and happening with youth and happening with age and happening with information and access and like what the future even means or what the past means, what
Right.
history means, what the present means, and all of those are contested terrain
Mm.
given this like wild and wacky world that we are currently inhabiting. And those forces, the forces that make those things prominent, are really strong. And of course, like never neutral.
Mm.
So so yeah, it makes conversation difficult, it makes community difficult, it makes collegiality difficult, and it's a wonder that people ever have productive conversations. But that also means that when you do, cherish it, curate it, try to um like perpetuate it, because community ain't guaranteed, especially not in academia, and
Nah.
especially not in hip hop, and especially, like not in any. I mean, one thing that I know when I go home, or one thing that I know when I go to the barber shop, depending on where I'm at, is that like there's a kind of hospitality that already exists. I think that we
Mm.
probably, would be well served for understanding what like hip hop hospitality might look like in academia,
Mm.
and also outside of academia. Like the there's a reality where folks like Roxanne Shante and Sparky D and KRS One and Minister Server, whoever else,
Right.
where these folks contributions are completely being written off and discounted, and they're being ignored while they're right here. They're the living, breathing history that we are building on, and folks
Mm.
are ignoring them and making them feel like they're not welcome in the room.
Wow.
And so that is like that's the definition of inhospitable. That's like going into somebody's house and then not speaking to nobody and then just sitting on the couch, turning on the TV. And we all know better than to do that. We all know better than to come in the house and not speak to nobody.
Yeah.
Except that we are literally doing a version like that, a version of that in, like I said, in academia, but also in pop culture. Folks are walking in the hip hop's house and not speaking to nobody, putting their feet up on the table with muddy shoes and like turning the channels or turning the volume all the way up. And then when somebody complains, they're like, yo, like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
Or they're like, whatever you're talking about is bullshit. Or don't nobody want to hear your radio? And it's like, this is my house. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
No, the radio is supposed to be on. Like, that's why people come to my house.
That's great. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, even how Mark Anthony Neal, his talk, I think, was anchored around like how hip hop needs to be more situated within Black studies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that was kind of what his approach to it was, where he's talking about like uh he used a term that actually Regina brought up first. She said like sonic genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of reframed that with remembrance and archiving, and how
Yeah.
hip hop tends to like do all of these things, and but we want it to be not, it's not jazz, it's not funk, it's not these other traditions, or it's not gospel, it's not blues, it's not these things that maybe some folks in Black studies who I guess might be from a different era, or a different, might have never liked hip hop in the first place, see hip hop as this cute little thing over here that isn't nestled in Black studies per se.
Yeah.
It could be nestled in linguistics, which is
Yeah.
sort of like, what Sammy and Adam Bradley were talking about, with like the linguistics of it is what we're looking at, or
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how the words that are being said by the MC are bringing forth X, Y, and Z, but then that might alienate other folks and
Yeah.
other disciplines. Whereas I think Mark Anthony Neal was trying to like really ground it in saying like, well, we have to really look at the documentation work that hip hop does as
Mhm.
critical and really grounded in Black studies if we're really making this claim that hip hop is one of the greatest contributions that Black
Yeah.
Americans have made to whatever in the last 50 years or so. And
Mhm.
how do we have those critical conversations, and how can that inspire new scholarship that may or may not come from me, but it
Yeah.
should happen. Again, I thought it was interesting that probably the two most I guess I don't want to say esteemed, but I guess like folks who I guess have been at it the longest
Yeah.
like had the shortest talks and were more like, I want to hear from y'all type of
Yeah.
thing. And that was sort of an interesting approach, whereas I felt like that was an interesting approach, whereas like the first two talks were very much about how the institution can work with community and how UCLA had this goal with their rap lab to do that.
Mhm.
um but then Regina, I felt like was like, I want y'all to know I belong on this stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was kind of her positionality. But I think in her, and you made me think about it as you were talking. Is like the fact she even had to do that is kind of messed up, right? Or that
Yeah.
she felt that she had to do that, because
Yeah.
because I felt like that
But
almost messed up the moment of her being able to even talk about her work, because she was spending a lot of time trying to preface why her work's important.
yeah, but that I think that that's the thing, like where you, me, or like lots of other people might just show up, and people are just like, oh yeah, you belong because look at you. You know what I mean? And again, like it's not only that room, I imagine.
Right,
I remember
right.
being at Clemson. I remember being at Clemson when I was on the job market and I was doing my graduate teaching, and in the students, which was like the student body at Clemson at some point when I was there was like 88% white.
Mm,
And I was teaching technical writing, and I was talking about being on the job market, having the dissertation that I wrote and trying to do the work that I was trying to do. And then I was like really kind of talking to them about genre, about formality and technical documents, and like visual rhetoric. What you say when you show up, how you show up.
mm.
And one of the students was like, "You just need to humble yourself and put on a suit." And I was like, that
Oh
again,
wow.
yeah, that's a strange conclusion to jump to, and also a strange way to phrase that. But they were like kind of asking for that, like that advance apology for being in the room, or the tell
Mm,
me that you belong in the room by the way you show up.
right.
And I'm like, yeah, I mean, anybody who says that to me is somebody that I'm not interested in talking to for real. But if you want to be in those rooms, then sometimes you are pressured to make that kind of apology. Like, it
Yeah,
might seem like I don't belong on this stage, but I do,
yeah.
or I belong on this stage, whatever it might be, because like the rhetorical stakes are so high that I also, among those students at Clemson, remember talking to a first year writing student, and the person was just like, seems like you need to read more books. And I'm like, okay. And what they were trying to they were trying to disagree with me, but I
Mhm.
think they were insinuating that I only listen to rap music,
Oh wow.
and that I needed to like pick up like cloth and paper books. And I'm
Yeah,
like, that, yeah, it's weird for someone to assume that I don't read books because they've been told that I'm a rapper.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I'm also your instructor for this class.
Yeah,
Right? You think that somebody was like, oh, well, you was just like they saw me rapping in the mall or outside the gas station and was like, hey, would you like to teach technical
yeah,
writing at Clemson?
yeah.
And but that you could imagine how someone who's like maybe not me might
Mhm.
go the extra mile
Mm.
to demonstrate why they deserve to be respected as the teacher,
Yeah.
because they might not be able to get their lesson across when the student is sitting there thinking the whole time, oh, this dude only listens to rap
Right.
music,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So there's that, and that's something that I saw on my evaluations when I was there. All of this informs my, my pedagogy currently, and this it informs my advising currently. But I can only speak from my position and how that doesn't inspire me to offer the apologetic. Like I said, it usually inspires me to say I'm not going nowhere to be tolerated. And so if I'm in a classroom and something like that happens, a lot of times I just laugh at it,
Mm.
or I let it go. But everybody can't let shit like that go. Or
Nah.
again, like it might be dangerous.
Yeah.
It might be detrimental to your career
Yeah.
to let those things go, because then it starts turning into, like, it snowballs into all these other things, and then people will, like, they'll just narrate you out of existence. And,
Man.
and we know, like I'm saying, that like the folks who were writing about this in Black studies and were writing about this, like the black feminist scholarship, has talked about how, like biology and storytelling mix to create realities that seem natural because the language precedes it.
Mm.
That's really going on. That's, I mean, and so, well, so whether you agree that hip hop should be situated in Black studies, I
Mm-hmm.
think that you should be reading Black studies, because a lot of the stuff that, like, the conclusions folks are going to arrive at eventually have already been being discussed for, far more than those 30 years that we're
Right.
tracking with hip hop in academia.
Right.
Like, so, if you ain't reading Amiri Baraka, you probably should pick up some Baraka. If you ain't reading Hortense Spillers or
Yeah.
Sylvia Winter or Bell Hooks or Amani Perry, you need to be, pick them up and read, and read what they've said,
Yeah.
because like you're going to end up out here making a fool of yourself, making a claim that you believe is new,
That's been done.
that's
Yeah.
been done a long time ago, and then you reveal yourself as being narrowly focused on this thing where, like I saw at one of these hip hop conferences where somebody was saying that they were writing a definitive history of one of the boroughs in New York that I'm pretty sure a history has already been written about.
Yeah.
But they were, like, and it was being published. Or you end up, I mean, even in the worst sense, and it's no shade to Questlove, but like the publisher, when they wrote about his hip hop is history book, on the back of the copy that's sitting right there, the definitive
Mm-hmm.
history of hip hop that only Questlove could write, which is like, that's interesting to call this definitive and say only he can write it, when you could easily just say it's a memoir.
Yeah.
You could easily just call it a history, as opposed to the history.
Right.
And when you do that, then it makes him vulnerable. Again, like, it's not going to come to the publisher. Like, people ain't going to direct their ire at the publisher. They're going to direct their ire at the body of the person whose name is on the front of that document.
Yeah.
And so that the power of that institution put a target on your back, and it's not even a target. Like, it's not even fair that the target is on your back. So yeah, like, and the thing is, on Questlove's behalf, folks will say that kind of thing. They might not say that on the behalf of somebody who doesn't look like Questlove or have Questlove's resume. And that's the reason that some of this unspoken stuff needs to be spoken, and we need to talk about it, because
Mm.
all scholarship is not received equally, because all scholars don't have, like, equal standing, with regard to identity and subjectivity. And
Yeah.
so everybody's not received the same. We could write
Mm.
the same paper and it will get different treatment. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and so folks, like, we can pretend that peer review does the thing you think it does in this arena. Like, we can pretend about that if y'all really want
Yeah.
to, because like,
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. But part of my testing the peer review was to say, I mean, was to be able to make that statement that I just made.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, like, they said they did this, and like, we're operating as if that is true. But I
Mm-hmm.
guess that just means that like that's another one of these things that we ain't gonna tell the whole truth about. And because we ain't gonna tell the whole truth about it, then to some people it's gonna register as a lie.
Oh man. I mean, even to the point of, I don't know, it's peer review is obvious, you know, in turn, at least for me, at least, I feel like in a space when folks are writing about hip hop, there's certain people that are sent the manuscript or are sent the
Mm-hmm.
draft or whatever, and then you can almost tell just by regionality
Yep.
the approach or whatever. Like at this point, I know when I put a paper anywhere and it's like, oh, uh, Chicago drill rap, I sound like something
Yep. Yeah.
Jabari was doing.
Yep.
Like is, and then all of the all of my citations are taken out. So it's like I think this is his new. This must be his new thing.
Yep.
It's kind of obvious. So then it becomes more like even in the feedback, it's the person is talking to me. Like I think
Mm,
it's just like an interesting like song and dance where and
yeah.
whether it's positive or negative, the person knows clearly who they're talking to.
Yeah. And so
You know what
and
I
so
mean?
and yeah, and I'm
Like,
not saying positive or negative. I'm just saying
yeah,
like it is not the thing that we like that folks act like it is. And
yeah.
that's very clear. I mean, especially in the case where you're sending somebody audio files and it's very clearly my voice,
Oh yeah, that's even more. That's a even
right? So
yeah.
so
Because I talked to View, I was like, I'm listening to your project. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, what's the point of me pretending like
yeah.
I was like,
Well,
I'm listening to your project. This is
but I
what I
think that
think.
it's because those institutions need to be able to say that they can do a thing that they might not even really want to do better. And so that means that the future of hip hop studies looks like well, really like different methodologies. How can we
Hmm.
imagine something that might evaluate or engage with what is there and make it better or make it the most rigorous or make it the most constructive or the most precise version of the thing that we need for it to be in order to contribute, but
Hmm.
not reproduce this thing that we're trying to move from one context to another without
Mm.
ever changing it at all. Like it's like the model of American history to tell the history of Black people.
Yeah.
Well, like, I mean, like that might be what got us Black History Month, but that model, like to set aside February to like start all the way over and then try to like be comprehensive in 28 days, that model falls short. So if we're
Mm.
gonna but why would we reproduce it when we know that it was bad to begin with? So what's the academic version of that where we're
Hmm.
just like, yeah, well, we're going to submit this to the peer review that we use to find out whether penicillin works?
Yeah.
Right? Because like the way that a rap song works might be very different from the way that penicillin works. Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
nobody's saying that it don't heal and that it can't do the stuff that it does, but we have to have a way to evaluate that that's like that's different
Hmm.
that meets the circumstance. And I think that is not only the future, it should be the present. So it's almost
Mm.
as if like the current is operating in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and,
I'm.
and
Yeah, that was apparent. I mean, I don't know, and I think even one thing I did share with Regina is I liked how she brought up you know some ideas about queerness. That she brought up some ideas about like the Black church. She brought up
Mhm.
some ideas about like things that are in contemporary Black Southern life that can tell us more about you know things that are happening in the contemporary South that can tell us about contemporary Black life more generally.
Mhm.
I was telling her though that I felt like, I think the same can be said for other regions too that aren't
Mhm.
that aren't the East or the West Coast, where I think a lot of attention has been paid. I mean, really, just New York and LA. I think there's a lot of attention that's been paid in those spaces. But I was also telling her that I think, and I recognize this now coming from Northwestern to South Carolina, that there are some institutional politics being at certain types of places that simply sometimes won't allow. I won't say won't allow, that's probably not the right way of putting it. Don't encourage or support certain types of work, where I was telling her that, like, there are grad students that are doing the work that you're saying should be done, but their advisors are telling them not to put it out.
Yep.
Their advisors are telling them that's not going to get you a job. The institution is telling them, like, hey, we need this taught, not that taught,
Yeah.
or like, why don't you find a way to make this touch on civil rights? Because that's what we
Yep.
need. Or can you figure out a way to do it in this way that is in line with what we already want to happen? So I was telling her that, just because I was like, I loved what she was saying, but I was like, have you ever thought about that? Because I was like, even in terms of the people on the stage, you're at an institution that probably isn't deemed as elite or whatever. And so, like, are the powers that be at your institution, would they even be encouraging of, like, what you know what I mean? Like, how
Yeah.
do you see that fitting into the future of hip hop studies, where folks have to feel like they graduated from Princeton or Harvard or certain types of schools to even be emboldened enough to, like, pursue
Yeah.
whatever route that they want to take? Whereas, like, my grad students are like, I'm working full time. The stipend ain't shit.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. Whereas I had, classmates at Northwestern, we're getting about 50,000 a year in stipend, and I'm like, they're complaining, and I'm like, this. I get it, you're complaining, but, like, comparative to what I'm
Yeah.
seeing, some of my friends who are in other programs, we're like living like fat rats right now, and you're not seeing that. The travel budget that we got when I was a PhD student is the same travel budget I have now. Actually, it was better at Northwestern as a grad
Wow.
student.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I'm like, like, there's something to that. In my
Yeah.
discipline, you can see it in media studies and journalism, communications. Like, there's certain, it doesn't matter what university you go to, you get to talking, or you go to these conferences and you see the tree unfold, where you're like, oh, like, you didn't go to NYU, but your advisor went to NYU. Or
Yeah.
you didn't go to Princeton, but you studied under this person that went to
Yeah.
Princeton. And so, like, the tree is apparent, is evident. And when you break those things down, I think the same is starting to exist in hip hop studies, but there's really, like, 10 universities that are, like,
Yeah.
producing the people who are made to
Yeah.
matter. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I think in hip hop studies, it also becomes, if you're not a Nas fellow, are you relevant?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, there's that too. Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
I did a fellowship at Harvard, but it wasn't in the archive. It wasn't at,
Mm-hmm.
in the Hutchins Center. It wasn't
Yeah.
engaging with that. I'm in the law school talking to cyber law professors about, like, clout chasing and usage of
Yeah.
platforms, and they're like, does Skip Gates know what you're doing? Like,
Yeah.
like,
So
why do they not know about your work? I'm like, I submitted the same project to
yeah.
them, so it's like, it's not my time. It's not my time to be over there. It's my time to
Yeah.
be over here.
Well, yeah, and so some of it is like, like the becoming. It's almost like, you don't you don't get invited until like you prove that you should be invited, but then by that time you don't really need to be invited. It just feels
Mm,
good to be invited.
right.
Um, and I think that, in a certain way, I was going to say that like one of the things, this is not necessarily institutional. It is probably interpersonal and individual, that like many of us who are in the spaces that we're in have to um, kind of let go of what we didn't get. And
Mm-hmm.
what I mean is that we kind of have to be the mentors and the advisors that the students need, rather than the mentors and
Mm,
advisors that we had.
right.
And like, because reproducing what we had again is going to get results. Like, I don't need a student who works with me to struggle the way that I struggled to get
Mm,
a hip hop scholar to respond to them.
mm,
But I know that I struggled through that because I wasn't important enough. And then, like when I became important enough, or when somebody cashed in that chip for me,
right.
then I was able to get FaceTime with a person that I really needed to talk to for my work to do the work that it needed to do. And again, I'm kind of like, well, I'll have a different approach. It's more likely that I'm going to talk to you if I don't know you and you probably don't have no support, because
Mm,
you need me to talk to you much more.
right.
Like when I was in Clemson, I needed to talk to folks because I
Yeah.
wasn't connected to any of the hubs that existed.
Right.
So that's another, again, it's so easy to have your nose down doing the work that you do, and then not really look at any of this other stuff and not pay attention to it. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily feel like it's nefarious. I think that
Mm-hmm.
structurally it's built in such a way that you could do that, and then like not just claim innocence, like actually be innocent
Yeah.
of, like the thing that people might accuse you of, because no, you weren't doing that intentionally. No, you weren't
Right.
being difficult. No, you weren't being intentionally obstructive and or elusive. You were
Mm-hmm.
just doing your job, and when you
Yeah.
do your job the way people ask you to do your job, that makes your time like way more precious than you would even consider it.
Yeah.
And now you have to budget it in order to live your regular life and do your
That's
job
true.
successfully.
That's real.
Yeah, and so that's I mean, again, it makes it so much easier for me to not take none of this shit personally,
Yeah.
because if I took it personally, I think I would just be angry every day. If
Yeah.
every omission, every perceived slight, every real slight, every like real hostile move, if I took all of those things as being between me and another person, but between me and the individual who did the fucked up thing,
Mm-hmm.
I would be spending all of my time thinking about people who literally have proven to me that they don't like me.
Mm.
Why would I give them that much space in my life and in my world that I'm thinking about them more than I'm thinking about the people who really fuck with me and the people who have proven that they love me?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's easy. It takes practice to do that.
Yeah.
But like what we have right now, folks are like really letting the voices of people who dislike them and would have them not exist live in their head much more than the voices of people who want to support them and make their work blossom and bloom. And so that's the thing that, like, that's something that I know that I can do for the students that I work with, both graduate and undergraduate. That's the work
Yeah.
that I know that I can do for the people who have chosen to be colleagues to me, or people
Mm-hmm.
who have chosen to be friends to me. That's
Right.
that's not an obligation to everybody. That's not something everybody gets, because I don't have the capacity to give that to everybody or do that for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. But like those folks who have elected to come here to study, those folks who have elected to be friends, those folks who have elected to be good colleagues, this is what we do. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Because folks will pretend like they will act like they have, like folks will act like they are owed your time or that they're owed
Yeah.
your energy. And part
Yeah.
of it has to do with like, well, I'm here, like we here, and that's just something that again that we have to revise. You can you can try to have an ethic of I fuck with everybody who fuck with me,
Mm-hmm.
but like that might not be about everything. You know what I mean? Like somebody might not rock with this particular project or this particular thing. And rather than saying to you, hey, I don't rock with you on that thing, then, like other weird stuff happens. And so this is why, like somebody like, I appreciate Chenjerai, because like at least we can disagree face to face. And I think that also some of it is like, it's not even, this is probably part of your other point. It's not even a matter of not being able to disagree face to face. It's like, I don't even know this person well enough to disagree without it being or seeming disagreeable, or without like completely jeopardizing like a potential friendship, or completely
Mm-hmm.
jeopardizing what might have been a productive relationship otherwise. Because again,
Yeah.
like the structures make it seem like I personally dislike you because I didn't do this thing, when it more likely is that everybody is busy and overextended and is being asked to do way more than they should be being asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably more likely the thing that's going on.
It is,
So
especially for us as Black folk in this thing. You getting pulled in all these different directions, and even to the extent that like being in the hip hop studies conversation is a conversation, for me at least, that's an add-on that I have to
Yep.
like go
Mm-hmm.
go outside of my discipline to create that relationship
Yeah.
where, like,
Yep.
in reality, like, I have a dean and a department chair that are like, oh, okay, yeah, for sure, that's a conversation you should be a part of. Here's some funds, go do it. But they
Yeah.
also know, like, this is no way gonna impact like your CV and what you need to be doing to get to XYZ place in this discipline has nothing to do with that
Yeah.
conversation. Not
Well,
for real, not really. like
if I
like
have if I have any, like that's one of the things that I appreciate about my colleagues here in music. And I know music has traditionally been hostile to hip hop, but it's that folks are trying to insist on the hip hop of it all. But like that's
mhm.
also written into the line that, like
Yeah.
that I'm on. It's written into the job that I have. But that's also, again, this is one of those points where when
Mm,
we mention it in the conversation, it's because, well, of course you can produce music
yeah.
for tenure, right? Because, or of course you can make albums for tenure. And it's like, yeah, you say of course, but it hasn't been done because of
Not
this
for real.
hostility that precedes it. So
Yeah.
we kind of have to get into the like sort of the minutia of it, because if
Yep.
we don't get into the minutia, someone is going to say, well, what's the difference between what you're doing there and what you're doing there? And then this makes the thing that people are looking at like competition, that makes that silly, because we are literally not competing, because we're being judged by different metrics on different
Yeah.
rubrics. And
Yeah.
so when we get presented to the world, somebody might say associate professor or full professor of whatever.
Yeah.
But like when we are being presented to our colleagues, we're being presented like, like you're being flown up a disciplinary flag that
Hmm.
is not judging you on how many features you had this year.
Nah. Yeah. Not at all. Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, so that's the, yeah, and so again, it just, community would be so much better if we did have these kinds of conversations, and we did like really um I think operate with a little bit more grace and a little bit more generosity with other folks. Um however, um I absolutely understand when that grace and generosity are not afforded. And the
Yeah.
reason is because, like I said, folks are spread thin, folks are tired. And so,
Yeah.
that means trying not to take it personally and not to like make it about me, but
For
also
sure.
keeping myself out of the line of fire. So I'm not going to merely be tolerated. I am going to go and engage with people who not only fuck with me, have demonstrated they fuck with me and will
Hmm.
continue to, as opposed to going. I mean, again, there is that, like, sometimes, as you said, like sometimes you got to pop out. Like sometimes you do got to just show up at the thing. You got to show up at the
Hmm.
at the event. But there are other times where you got to be like, do I have the energy to show up at this and then have all
Right.
this come at me in all the ways that it's going to? And
Right.
then when you make that decision, you shouldn't be blamed for making that decision for your own health.
Right. No, that's so real. Cause I mean, there was a point where I was like, I was talking to a few different people. Um, Not necessarily about the event, but just the thought of like canceling a class,
Yep.
figuring out just what I got going on here,
Yeah. Yeah.
like figuring out my life. I'm like, okay, call my wife, like, hey, I think I'm gonna go to this thing.
Yeah.
She's like, why? Like, it's like
Yep.
that type of thing where I'm like, look, this will be like 36 hours, da 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 da. But I also recognize that, you know, I feel like, questions and even conversation, to get back to the earlier point, to kind of, I guess, come full circle, is like, well, can the quality of conversation be made better if I'm in person? Or can the
Yeah.
quality
Yeah.
of, you know, the dialogue maybe have a different perspective if I'm in the
Yep.
room versus if I'm on
Yep.
a live stream and I put it in a comment thing and it may or may not get read,
Yeah.
may or may
Yep.
not get approached. There's a difference. And so I think it did, on some level. It's interesting because I it might have done more just like you said, to just sometimes just to physically be somewhere, and then you get those little breaks because it wasn't really a full event like that. So that's the other
Hmm.
thing, is I think sometimes these events happen and they're thrown together
Yeah.
in a way where, yeah, the panelists are there and they talk amongst each other, but there's not a substantive Q&A that
Yeah.
actually is building in a way that I've seen in my discipline and other instances where I'm going to these like the future of journalism type
Yeah.
events where there's like they've specially invited like 15 to 20 people who aren't even on the panel.
Yeah.
There's a luncheon between those people, and then there's like
Yeah.
far more dialogue that isn't just top down. Like we're the preeminent scholars of the field and we're telling you what it is. And the grad students who are at Harvard, of course, they're gonna, I understand, like they're gonna give questions, but it's also a love fest. It's really a love fest.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
every thank you for your work. I'm just so humbled to be here, and thank you for
Hmm.
what you've said. And then by the time you get that out, you don't even remember what your question is. And there
Yeah.
was a lot
Yeah.
of that
Like,
going on. It was just like, okay, is there really a question, or are you just telling me you happy that I'm here,
yeah.
type of thing.
I had to stop class the other day because students started doing that. Like we're in a feedback session on a song, and I'm like, you know what? Like all of this sounds great, but ain't none of it gonna make the song better. And this person literally asked for feedback on how they could make the recording and the quality of the delivery better. And we're talking about like, oh, that makes me feel so good when you say this line or that line and all of that. Like it's great. It's great for the ego too.
Mm,
However, like there's a thing that we're trying to get done. And so, but that means that like curating the spaces, like I'm having folks come tomorrow for an event tomorrow around the mastered version of the Owning My Masters album. And the way that we'll do that hopefully is that we can have substantive conversation. Like I want it to be a commemoration, not necessarily a celebration, a commemoration of the
mhm,
project, but also I want it to be informative for the people who were there who
mm,
might not get any of this information from elsewhere, because it's not like ink ain't never been spilled about it, but you haven't heard from these people, and these people's opinions, these people's analyses are just as important as anything you hear me say. But it rings differently whenever I'm saying that. So, it's a facilitation. And this is one of the things that like talking to Deborah McDowell and Guy Ramsey or Dr. McDowell and Dr. Ramsey, whenever they did the thing for my 2018 for the Sleepwalking 2 album,
mhm,
it was like thinking, how can we have an academic event, a so-called academic event, where it isn't just where the music takes priority. And so we
right,
listened to the album together, and then to hear the conversation between like Dr. Avery and Dr. Hamilton, both Dr. Hamiltons, and Truth was there, and like all of these, like Deborah McDowell is right is
mm,
is right there. And so I was able to use that audio and transcription for a publication. But that also means, like, because it took the imagining together. When me and Professor McDowell were talking, she's like, well, what would happen if I called Guy Ramsey up? And I'm like, that would be wild, because I never
mhm,
met him before. But,
mhm,
she is, like the institution. She
right,
is the Woodson, and like the intellectual lineage of Black feminist literary criticism. So
right,
that for me was like that can be a model. It might not be the
mm,
model, but it can be a model. It can be a thing that we can do. So
mhm,
what do I owe, or what can I pay forward now? And so
mhm,
in the thing that we're doing, it's intentional that a couple of the graduate students that I work with here are part of the program, but
right,
it's to not put them in that position where like they have to like offer you more of a comment than a question, talking about how brave and great your work is. But
mhm,
they get to like what are you studying, and what do you get from engaging with this in this space with all of these people who are going to be your future colleagues,
yeah,
but in reality are kind of your colleagues right now. They just get paid more than you.
yeah, 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 and quiet as kept. I was telling somebody I went to ICA, which is the International Communications Association last year in Australia, and I went to a whole bunch of like grad talks. And I remember posting on Twitter that I was like, the most brilliant work like saw was done by grad students, but they don't have the confidence that like the
Mhm.
other folks have when they walk in.
Yeah.
And I was like, the funny thing is like I see folks that sit in those talks and they're jotting down what's going on, what's being said, or like
Mhm.
some of these grad talks inform the new directions that certain
Yeah.
people's work end up taking.
Yeah.
And I was like, the
Yeah.
funny thing to me is I was like, yo, like I don't remember what I tweeted, but it was something to the effect of the lack of confidence that some of these grad students have here at ICA is actually making it appear like their talks aren't as brilliant as they actually are.
Yeah.
And so I guess, maybe the rapper in me was looking at it like, dang, if they performed it a little better, they don't realize what they're saying is so much more impactful than what they even know. And I think sometimes when somebody's up there and they're nervous and it just seems like they're unsure, or they're overly citing other people because they're not sure
Mhm.
if the thing that they're saying is valid. And I was like, I remember being there and I know what that feels like, but I'm like, some of these talks, I was like, wow, this is the most, literally, I'm like, this is
Yeah.
the best thing I've heard, but because of
Yeah.
the way it's being delivered, um,
But
maybe
but
it's
that
not hitting home, or people like tuning out, or
but
not necessarily
that's
paying
the I
attention.
think that's that thing being reproduced. Like that is
Yeah,
because because we know that there are folks who do farm their ideas from graduate students,
yeah,
and folks who do use graduate labor for like their intellectual projects rather than trying to inform the projects the graduate students want to do.
yeah.
I know that that's a thing that exists because that's the thing that I've experienced. But again, I can't be the kinds of advisors that I've had. I have to be the kind of advisor that the students need.
Mm,
And so I'm conscientious of that as well. It makes sense that graduate students are doing the challenging and brilliant stuff,
mm-hmm.
and not getting the credit for it until they become whoever they need to be. Like they're
Yeah,
on the Kanye West or Scott Storch, Ghost production,
yeah,
until they co-produce a hit, and then
yeah.
they can go out on their own.
Folks don't even know they're doing this sometimes, though. I think sometimes, I don't know this for a fact, but I guess I'm just going off of my own experience, because I was like, I guess I would liken it to comedians saying that they never go to listen to anybody else's routine, but yet
Hmm.
somehow end up telling the same joke as someone else.
Yeah.
And I looked at it from that perspective, where I guess very rarely do I do the whole get up at 8 in the morning, because I'm not a morning person, and go to those talks at like 8 in the morning, and 8 in the morning on a Saturday where like no one's really supposed to be there. But I had did that at this conference probably because it was international, and I
Yeah.
just kind of had I don't know, my body's sort of framework was off to where I was up really early. But yeah, I feel like that you know these power dynamics that we speak of sometimes overshadows the actual quality of the conversation, or the quality of the work that gets discussed, or like
Yep.
where or what actually pushes things forward. But yeah, I definitely have seen where folks are thinking that what they're doing is some new direction that's never been touched upon, but it's probably some paper that they read in peer review and canned. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
they were like, "Oh, this is a good idea. The student doesn't have the resources I have to
Yeah.
get the idea done." And they don't, I guess because they don't even know who the student was in the first place, they can run with that idea.
Yep.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah. And they
it's
feel
like,
no guilt. Again, that's where the innocence thing. That's what James Baldwin is writing about in the Fire Next Time. It's a quarter past one.
yeah, yeah, I'm about to hop on this other call, but no, I
Okay.
appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you hopping on this call and making the time. And
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. For
I
sure.
always leave our conversations with more than what I even anticipated. So, you
Word.
know, for sure,
Nah,
for
but
sure.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing about it because like I wouldn't have known nothing about it without that tweet or I wouldn't have known anything about what was happening. I knew it was going on, but I didn't know what was, like what actually went on at the place.
If it wasn't for Instagram, I wouldn't randomly. It was I think Mark Anthony Neal posted it on Instagram, and I was like, wait a minute, I think I could show up for that.
Yeah.
Like, it was that type of deal. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go. And it was worthwhile. I think the conversation that was had was substantive, but not as where it could have been, just because there was too much kumbaya, I think.
But that also means there's more work to be done, and for some of these things, I think it's just, the reality is that we're probably in a position to facilitate them rather than complain about what didn't happen at that thing. We just make the thing that we want to happen, like we put it on. Because if not, then we will continue leaving events like that feeling like the thing ain't being done. We can't wait for Harvard to do it. You know what I mean? I think it's the same thing with the scholarships. Yep.
Yep. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, of course. I'm gonna holler at you.
All right, G.
All right, peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating or review. And to catch the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at KnowledgeSense82 and on Twitter at KnowledgeSense82. Now that's different than how you normally would spell it. That's NALEDGE, Sense 82, as in 1982. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Peace.